I want to start this podcast episode with a confession. As a healthcare provider, the longer that I'm in practice, the more questions I have and the less I feel like I know. You might find that to be confusing because it seems like I should be moving in the opposite direction. But can't you relate to this? Is there anything in your life that raises more questions than answers the more you dive in and learn about it? I am a healthcare provider, but I'm also a healthcare consumer like you. And when it comes to decisions about my healthcare and healthcare for my wife and kids, I'm probably just as confused as you are. And actually, in some cases, I may be more confused than you because of knowledge. It's funny to say, but I feel like I've been to Oz and I've looked behind the curtain. I've seen the wizard for who he really is, in some cases. And these experiences make me skeptical about things that I used to have confidence in. So, ignorance is bliss. Now, rather than freestyle this episode as I normally do, I've written down my thoughts. I want to share my confusion and my frustrations, and I don't want to miss anything. This podcast is perfect for you if you feel overwhelmed by conflicting health information. There have always been skeptics of the medical community, of Big Pharma, and of government health officials. I come from a healthcare community, the chiropractic community, that historically opposes medical conventions such as vaccines. Throughout the years, it hasn't been uncommon for chiropractors to speak out against medications, vaccines, surgeries, and certain public health mandates. On the flip side, many people, both medical and non-medical, vehemently support public health initiatives, medications, and vaccines, even to the point for pushing for things like vaccine mandates. We seem to live in an increasingly polarized society with conflicting opinions on some really important topics, like healthcare. I do believe that most people exist somewhere in the middle. For example, most people will acknowledge the historical success of medications, surgeries, vaccines, and public health initiatives, and they will recognize the potential present and future benefits. However, they also recognize that any medical treatment or any health mandate may have negative effects. Now, there seems to be this growing ambivalence around these topics because we don't know who to believe and we don't know who to trust. It's interesting because we've never had greater access to information than we do today, and it feels almost impossible to filter all of it. The best way I can describe it is that it feels like we're drinking from a fire hose. And then to make things even more complicated, search engine and social media algorithms curate the information that we receive by placing us in echo chambers. So we only hear one viewpoint, and then the alternative viewpoint is demonized. So who do we trust? Do we trust public health officials and physicians who support those narratives? Or do we trust alternative healthcare providers and social media influencers? Alternative healthcare providers are great at pointing out the shortfalls, the financial incentives, and the potential dangers of the medical complex. The problem is that alternative healthcare options usually lack quality evidence to support their treatments and products. Alternative healthcare will generally claim to be evidence-based. However, when questioned about the poor quality of our evidence, we usually resort to the tactic of claiming that we're somehow ahead of research or that our practices can't be studied by randomized controlled trials. So, we love research when it supports our brand of alternative healthcare, but we reject research when it highlights our weaknesses. Hypocritical. Now, let's make this issue even more complicated. The MAHA movement is incorporating many elements of alternative healthcare, and the federal and state governments can't seem to agree internally on what is healthy and what is unhealthy. Now we have this upside-down food pyramid. One week Tylenol causes autism, the next week it doesn't. It seems like no one can agree on vaccines or the validity of vaccine research. Apparently, drinking raw milk in saunas is now depicted as healthy, yet most Americans aren't even close to meeting physical activity guidelines. So what's going on? I think it'll be helpful. Let's get on the same page with a few things. Big Pharma is driven by profit and may not have our best interests in mind. True. I think we can all agree on this, at least to a certain extent. Insurance companies also are driven by profit and may not have our best interests in mind. Also true. Money can influence research and public health policies. True. Money can influence the way healthcare is delivered to you. Also true. But just because all of these statements are true doesn't mean the alternatives are inherently better, safer, more effective, or free from financial conflicts. Here's some more hypocrisy. Big Pharma is driven by profit. I think we can all agree on that. But one of the main alternatives to Big Pharma is Big Supplement. Supplement companies are incredibly profitable because there is a huge markup on these products and the regulations are pretty low. Research supporting these products is poor, so research and development is relatively cheap, if it even exists. And because regulations are low, we don't necessarily know what's in most of these products. We don't know if they are effective. And again, there's a huge financial incentive to sell them. So it's hypocritical to demonize Big Pharma for being profit-driven and then to turn around and present supplements as an alternative. It's hypocritical to claim that that medical research is tainted by financial interests and then present supplements as an alternative when really no research is needed to bring them to market. Now, the realm of pain and injury management is definitely not immune to this issue. Obviously, the debate around medications, supplements, and surgeries is important. But even if you're not going to seek medications, supplements, or surgeries, how do you choose the right care for the effective management of your pain or your injury? Do you need an X-ray or an MRI? Do you need to get your back cracked? Do you need rehab? Do you need laser therapy or shock wave? Do you need acupuncture or dry needling? I've heard this dilemma described as the supermarket effect. Picking the right healthcare provider to handle your pain or injury is confusing, and it's like picking the right bag of chips in the supermarket. You have so many options. How do you make a choice? Because now you're making decisions that are influenced by marketing, proximity, price, and recommendations. And the choice you make could drastically determine your outcome. And you need to make this choice with limited information. For example, if you have back pain, where should you go? If you choose to go to a shoe store, you can bet that they're going to try and sell you shoes for your back pain. If you choose to walk into a mattress store with back pain, they're probably going to try and sell you a mattress. If you walk into a traditional chiropractic office with back pain, they will offer you a back crack. And if you see a functional medicine provider, you're probably going to be buying some supplements. If you go to your primary care provider with back pain, you may get an X-ray, medication, and a recommendation for rest. It's predictable. And I'm not trying to say that any of these options are necessarily bad or wrong. But again, this brings us back to the big question: who do we trust? Now, the way COVID and the COVID vaccine were handled by the public health officials definitely eroded public confidence in scientists, politicians, and healthcare providers. That distrust drove many people to seek alternatives. For example, people were getting their necks cracked by chiropractors to treat symptoms of COVID, such as loss of taste and smell. So people are definitely confused and they are desperately seeking answers. Now, the current administration in Washington is amplifying this sense of confusion, and I don't believe that they're trying to confuse people. But RFK Jr. is making many contrarian statements and then trying to implement policies that could drastically change healthcare. Now, this could be good, it could be bad, or it could be both good and bad at the same time for different reasons. The truth is, we don't know. And right now, this is confusing. This heightened level of distrust has opened a door. a door through which conspiracy theories and pseudoscience are creeping in shoulder to shoulder with valid public health recommendations. The problem is that the public doesn't know who to believe. How do we identify pseudoscience from legitimate health recommendations? This seems to be a problem in primary care and pediatrics. As a healthcare consumer, a parent, and a husband, I understand this because I want to make the right choices for my family. I care less about my health and more about setting my kids up for success. And the thought of making healthcare choices that ultimately harm them is terrifying. There are some extremely political and hostile questions that we need to address. For example, should decisions about our bodies be made by us or by a network of social and health-related interests? There's an interesting dichotomy of opinion here when it comes to vaccines. People who are staunchly pro-vaccine tend to view the anti-vaccine movement as one of the greatest threats to public health and then therefore one of the greatest threats to our society. At the same time, people who are anti-vaccine tend to view vaccine mandates as one of the greatest threats to public health because of all the proposed adverse effects. One of the most controversial proposed side effects of vaccines is autism. The anti-vaccine movement sees vaccine mandates not only as a threat to public health, but also a threat to freedom. So, depending on which side of the fence you sit, vaccines can either be essential to public health or a threat to public health. Vaccine mandates could also be a threat to freedom. However, a failure to mandate vaccines could threaten the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of people who are immunocompromised. As I mentioned earlier, I think most people exist somewhere in the middle of these polarized opinions, but most of us can recognize the potential benefits and also the harmful effects of injecting things into our bodies. Now, your stance on this topic will influence the way you vote, the way you seek health care, and the way you interact with the community. So I have some questions. As individuals and as family units, how do we even begin to sort this out? What can we do to make more informed decisions? Now, I made a confession during my intro to this podcast. The more I learn and experience, the less I feel like I know. There is a saying that goes something like, always assume that you're wrong and then aspire to be less wrong. I like that. And unfortunately, I don't have any answers for you. As a parent and a husband, I'm always trying to be less wrong. As a healthcare provider, I try not to make assumptions, and I try to approach each patient as if their situation is new to me, because it is. Everyone experiences pain and injury differently, so healthcare options should be adaptable, at least to the greatest extent possible. So I'm going to leave you with that. I have more questions than answers, and the contents of this podcast episode should definitely not be used as medical advice. If you have questions about things like medications, vaccines, surgeries, anything in the medical realm, it's best to sit down and talk to a medical physician. If you've got questions about alternative healthcare, I may be able to help. Shoot me a message, and I'll do the best to either answer your question or connect you with someone who can. All right. Thanks for listening.